for many of us, Christmas has become such an emotional roller coaster. And one of the things that makes it particularly difficult is that it feels like Christmas starts earlier and earlier every season. Christmas music is on the radio Thanksgiving Day or before, and the sales start earlier and earlier, and everyone is feeling merry earlier and earlier. And so by the time we get to the third week in Advent, some of us are almost beginning to get Christmased out. The emotional toll that it takes. It's a joyful time. It's a wondrous time. For many of us, it's a difficult time because of pain associated around this time. But it's such an emotionally overwhelming time. And we have to get geared up earlier every year so that by the time we get to the third week, we may even get to the place that we'll say, I'll be glad when Christmas is finally done and I can get back to a slower pace of life. This is exhausting. We've been looking at the characters in the Christmas story, trying to look at them through fresh eyes and see something that we might not have seen before. As a kid, you might have had a lot of questions about Christmas. What would you get for Christmas? Were you on the naughty or the nice list? One of my favorite letters is this. Maybe it's not too late to get off the naughty list. Would your aunt knit you another pair of socks this year, or would you actually get something you wanted as a kid? Lots of questions. But the older we get, the questions shift a little bit. Maybe there are less questions about what's going to be under the tree and more questions about how I'm going to pay for what's going under the tree, or how I'm going to keep my family together for the long run. Maybe the questions get even bigger than that. Why am I here? Is this as good as it gets? If there's a God, if He's there, and if He loves me the way everybody claims, why do I feel the way I do? Why do these things happen to me? Today we're going to look at a group of men who made it their profession to ask those questions. And we're going to see something a little different. We've already seen the Christmas story through the eyes of Mary and the eyes of the shepherds, and today we're going to look, of course, at the wise men. Also called the Magi, another word that refers to their role in their society. They not only made it a point to ask questions, there are a lot of questions about them, things that we're not sure about. Let me give you a pop quiz about the Magi, okay? How many wise men were there? We typically say 3 because there were 3 gifts that we know of, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The Bible doesn't say how many there were. There may have been more. There may have been 2. It simply says Magi, wise men. What exactly is a Magi? Were they kings? That's what the song says. It doesn't say we 3 wise men or we 3 Magi. It's we 3 kings. Well, again, the Bible doesn't say. Magi were a social caste of astrologers, men who made it their business to study the stars, seeing the destinies of people and nations. They collected wisdom from other cultures. And if you remember, 500 years before Jesus, the Jews were exported to Babylon. There was a colony of Jews in Babylon. It's possible the Magi were from Babylon. And the word of this Messiah in the Jewish culture filtered into Babylonian culture and down to the Magi. And according to their astrological predictions, they were able to see that something important was going to happen in the Jewish nation. They saw what the Bible says was a star, his star, the star of the newborn king. And when they saw it, they followed it, right? It's not what the word says. They saw the star and they knew it represented the newborn king in Israel. And so it would make sense to go to the capital of Israel and ask where he was. And that's what they did. They went to Jerusalem and asked, where is this newborn king? Of course, they had the bad fortune to ask Herod, who was already, in his estimation, king of the Jews. And their presence in Jerusalem drew attention because everyone there knew that Herod, as a king, had a fierce temper, was a little unstable. And so when these men are coming saying they were looking for another king, the danger was Herod could lose it and take it out on the people of Jerusalem. The wise men had seen the sign of the star that represented Israel. It was their job, their role in life, to study the stars, ask the questions, get the answers. Anybody here check your horoscope? Study the stars to find out? We're Christians. We don't do that. Sometimes it's fun to read it. And one of the great things about most horoscopes is you can read an awful lot into what's said there. It's general enough. But there was a time when people took that very seriously. And it was this very practice that brought these men to Jerusalem. They were looking for the meaning of life in the stars. We ourselves have that very same kind of question going on. Why am I here? Why do these things happen? What's tomorrow going to bring? We sometimes ourselves look for signs. Have you ever looked at something that happened and you were sure that this was God intervening? That must be a sign. Others may ask the question, God, if you're there, will you give me a sign? God doesn't normally answer that way. So what kind of sign do you think would be helpful for us to figure out what our lives are all about? A preacher named Frederick Buechner came up with this suggestion. Suppose, for instance, that God were to take the great dim river of the Milky Way, as we see it from down here, flowing across the night sky, and would brighten it up a little bit, and then rearrange it so that all of a sudden one night the world would step outside and look at the heavens and see not the usual haphazard scattering of stars, but written out in letters, light years tall, I really exist. Everybody could go out, look at the night sky, and get the evidence. None of us could have done that. Somebody supernatural must have done that. It must be God. There would be a sign that everyone could see that God really is. Buechner then writes, the real problem would be that some probably child with bubble gum in his mouth would come out and ask the question, so what? He's up there. We're down here. What difference does it make? When the Magi set out to find the newborn King of the Jews, they were people who made it a point to look for answers. And we, so often, find ourselves in the same situation, looking for answers. Is it possible that the answer that we're looking for is not an answer, but a person? I remember the time that I had the worst bicycle accident of my life. And I was gushing blood from my head. And my neighbor, who was a trained Boy Scout, trained in first aid, came down and provided all that care. When we got to the hospital, I was distraught. I was beside myself. But my grandmother happened to be the head nurse at this hospital. And when I knew she was there, and she was the attending when the doctor came to stitch me up, it was okay. Grandma's here. You have found, as I have found, there aren't a lot of answers to our questions. Why in the world did God allow such a bright, perky, fighting young lady to suffer as she did and ultimately to die? Why? Why, God? And we're not going to get answers. What we will get instead is someone who will come into that painful place alongside us and hold us and say, I know it hurts, but I'm here. I'm here. That's what the Magi found. They didn't find answers. They found a person. The person they found was Emmanuel, God with us. This morning, if you have never had the experience of meeting Jesus, coming to him and saying, I need you to be with me, this would be a morning to say to him, I need you with me. And his promise is that he will be as good as his name, Emmanuel. He will come when you say, Lord, I can't do this on my own. Please come and live here. And he will come. And if you do know Jesus, and this Christmas season is one of those emotional times that is just so overwhelming, he is inviting you to take the time to be with him and remember again what it feels like to have someone hold you in the middle of all the things that don't make sense and all the things that are so stressful and say to you, it's okay. I'm here. Will you pray with me?